Climate action starts with us. The following guests from previous episodes of this podcast will talk about people-centric approaches to climate change. Coming up are guests talking about energy poverty, how a First Nations community on Prince Edward Island are being stewards of the land, how Halifax, Nova Scotia is investing in climate initiatives, and so many others. Here's what they have to say. There are a lot of, I guess you could say, technical problems, and I'm looking at my cheat sheet here because there's ventilation, there's technical issues, and then there's energy problems like with heat and air, and that's not equal in the sense that there's a lot of inequalities, I guess, that are taking place. I mean, you've got the technical side. I guess what I'm getting at is I don't know what I'm getting at.
I think your instincts are right. I think what you're identifying is this theme, right? So, the way I think of energy poverty and the way that I operationalize it in my life and my work is I think of energy poverty as a set of social and economic inequalities that can be addressed by improving energy efficiency in people's homes. And I say that because, if everyone in Canada felt cold inside their homes every hour of the day in the winter, then that can be seen as a technical problem, right? Maybe we don't have the right kind of housing. Maybe we don't have the right kind of heating system. So we can address that through some technical means alone. If everyone in the country was struggling to pay their energy bills, then we can address that through maybe lowering, energy rates for everyone or something like that. But the challenge here is in Canada, and as it is true in other parts of the world, but particularly here in Canada, is that there is a certain geographic pattern to how energy poverty shows up. There's a demographic pattern and there's a socioeconomic pattern. We know that low-income households are more likely to experience energy poverty. We know that renters are more likely to experience energy poverty. We know seniors who live in apartments and who live alone are more likely to experience health consequences from extreme heat events. We know rural communities face challenges securing unregulated fuels like propane during cold winter spells. And so we know, and we know single parents and households that spend a significant time indoors have challenges that come with lack of proper heating and cooling. So if there's not adequate ventilation, there could be chances of mold or dampness building up in the walls. So single parent households, especially single mom households, who tend to spend a lot of time indoors, increasingly face consequences. So what we do know is that the impacts of energy poverty are not equally spread across the country, but different groups of people experience that differently. And so what that tells us is that by improving the quality of people's homes, by improving energy efficiency inside people's homes, we can help address this social inequality. And so if we want a better life for all Canadians, if we want people to experience more well-being, so these are not, so we're crossing the chasm from, we need to save energy because kilowatt hours are great, or reducing climate impacts because greenhouse gas emission reduction is great. And those are important goals. But we're not just talking about that. We're talking about a broader set of social problems, about people experiencing well-being in their homes, people not being able to afford grocery bills, households struggling with ventilation issues and respiratory illnesses in their homes, kids struggling to maintain concentration and excel in school because they feel too cold inside their homes. These broader set of social challenges that if those are important to us, and as a new Canadian, though that is important to me, that everyone in Canada has access to better health, better well-being, better education, then you can use energy efficiency as a tool in your toolbox. By improving people's homes, we can address a whole set of social problems. And I think that's where this energy poverty perspective comes in. It's not just a kind of like a clinical academic analysis. Okay, who's paying X percent of their bills? But it's also like, what challenges do we have as a country? What are our goals in the future? And how do we improve well-being for everybody? And then what are the different tools we can use? In my pitch to people who are listening here is that energy efficiency on improving performance of people's homes is an important tool in helping us get to the kind of future we want as Canadians.
The First Nations people are stewards of this land. And, how does, in your opinion, the energy transition fit into this statement?
I mean, the energy transition really, it 100% falls into that. Like, as stewards of this land, we're trying to protect the land. And I mean, the renewable energy as a whole and climate change really is the world's movement to be able to protect this land. So I really feel like, it's the rest of the world starting to think like the First Nations. Like, we're stewards of this land, and other people now also want to be stewards of this land. They want to do what they can to protect this earth, because they're really seeing the detrimental effects that are being had on this land. And I feel that us as Indigenous communities really have we have a lot of knowledge that's built into our culture, and a lot of takeaways that the Western world can really take on that. So I really feel that we are going to be at the forefront of this, and as stewards of this land, it's really, really, really super important for us to do all that we can. And I really believe that we're very well positioned as we move forward in this transition. And I hope that we're a centerpiece for a lot of the work that's being done in this country.
More and more people are considering where their power is coming from, the average person, and also the environmental impact. How do we include, the average person in the energy conversation? Like, is it educators? Is it curriculum? What energy means?
It's so important that we all have this conversation. I'm probably not the person that gets invited to dinner parties sometimes, because maybe I want to talk about energy a little too often.
Oh, I'd love to have you.
It's so important that we all understand, where's our energy coming from? And when we don't have it, that's when we think about it. It's like, oh my goodness, when is it coming back on? But it's, for all of us to lean into the conversation about how do we get to net zero by 2050? How do we actually all work together for a solution? We all need to understand what's involved, and so I think up until recently, the energy conversation has been left with those engineers and scientists and energy strategy people, probably to the detriment of understanding, for everyone to understand what does it take to have clean energy into your home, into your lives, into your hospitals and your schools and your industries. And so we're trying to shift that. We have been bringing educators to the station for a conversation around energy. What does energy look like? How do we get it? And then we take them for a walk through the nuclear power plant to say, this is what nuclear power really looks like. It's not really maybe what you imagine. It's clean. It is, pristine, really. And that's one of the comments we typically get from the educators is, I didn't realize how clean this was going to be. And so we want them to understand, this is how energy is made. This is what it really looks like when you're in the power plant. And these are all of the operators that work here, high degree of professionalism. Nuclear safety culture is like the most important thing at the nuclear power plant. And so we want them to understand, you can see a windmill and you can see a solar panel on a rooftop, but you don't often get a chance to actually see a nuclear power plant and what's involved. And also, taking people to see a coal-fired plant or a hydro plant. It's important for people to see, okay, this is where my power is made, and then it gets transmitted to the lines, and then it makes it to my home. We often think of the line and the home, not necessarily the plant where it's actually coming from. Yeah,
that's correct.
That's important.
It is, definitely. Where does diversity inclusion fit into the climate change conversation?
As I said a little earlier, oftentimes we've left the energy conversation with those professionals, the engineers and the scientists and the energy strategists, and it hasn't really served us that well. We are still struggling with having more women in energy production. When I joined, MD Power back in 1989, very few women were operators. Very few women were, electrical engineers and civil engineers, mechanical engineers. The engineering has gotten, we've been getting higher numbers, but we're still only at about 18 to 20% women in the nuclear or in the energy industry. And so we need to improve on that. But I believe, and I'm biased, of course, because I'm a woman, but I believe we need more women in the conversation because, we're gonna have a different conversation. Women typically will be looking to the future of their children and their grandchildren, and what does this mean for my family? Men do too, but women tend to be a little bit more focused on the future generations, and definitely Indigenous people are focused on 7 generations out. And so we've been trying to do our environmental studies from an Indigenous lens. We've been trying really hard to have an Indigenous inclusion aspect to all of the work we do. Indigenous women, when you get that mixture and you have those conversations, it's just a different conversation. We need to have all of them. We need to have all of the conversations, and we all need to trust that we're all in this together and we're working together for future generations.
I was reading about your company, and you're doing a lot of amazing things around behavioral change, and that's where it all starts. And tell us, about your commitment to conservation at ThinkWell Shift.
Sure. So ThinkWell Shift, like you said, is a behavior change organization that we are in resource conservation, energy efficiency mostly, but we like to, what our motto is making change through choice, which is basically giving people some control over their sustainable habits. It seems like, sustainability is the trend right now. It's been the trend for a little bit. And a lot of people don't know where to even begin. They feel like they don't have control because we talk to people who are like, well, what am I supposed to do when the big organizations are the ones who are doing the most pollution and affecting the climate change and stuff? So people are a little more hesitant about just diving in when they don't have enough information. So we now give people information and we break it down to a point that a regular person like you and I can understand. Not like the engineers or like anything high level, like break it down so they can just understand basic things they can do to be more sustainable. And we give them the choice. We're like, listen, we know, like it seems like it's a lot. There's so much going on. There's so much information being given to you. But let's try something as simple as small behaviors that anyone can do, like turning off lights when you leave a room, taking a shorter shower, turning off the faucet when you brush your teeth while you're just brushing your teeth. Simple things that they can control, right? And then from there, we build into bigger behavior things and then jump into like things that cost money because most people don't want to jump into spending money right away, right? Like,
No.
Nobody wants to spend $2,000, $4,000 right away. But if you give them the small steps, the things they can definitely do on their own that are simple, and then once they're happy with that and we celebrate with them, we're like, oh my gosh, you're doing all these things already. That's exciting and excellent. All right. Awesome. You've got all this. Your house is energy efficient. You've got insulation in your house. Well, have you ever considered, potentially switching from oil heating to something else? Because these are big spenders and people are always hesitant to just spend this money without information. If all they hear is, oh, it's better for the environment. Yeah, but is it good for my pocket though, right? So we're giving people choice.
And it's those small steps that add up. Great to hear. ThinkWell Shift, you do a lot of work within schools and with school children, talking to youth. And how's that been working out as you educate them to climate change?
It's pretty awesome. Kids are fantastic. Kids have a whole different perspective on life that I wish adults could just keep. Like, I remember being a child and just being excited about everything. And then, as you age and adulthood kicks in and all the stresses of adulthood kick in, we let go of that like childlike free spirit and, we get tainted, right? But kids are just so free. And so speaking to them about such important topics is necessary because they get it. I wish someone had talked to me about stuff like this when I was younger, because then I would have made very different choices in my, as I was like in my teens and my young adult life, but I didn't know any better. So, imagine how many people could have known, right?
So give me your top 3 innovation solutions for active and sustainable transportation.
Okay, so let's, as we talked about first and last mile in the beginning for, in terms of transportation mode. If, for example, we are talking about active transportation, there is still the case is that people are using bikes or scooters for their leisure activities, and not for commute as a sense. There are people who are using, but the percentage is gradually increasing. And so one thing is in terms of these active modes of transportation is if you are walking, which is the healthiest thing or healthiest mode of transportation for your shorter trips. If it is you're going to a grocery store or drugstore to get your prescriptions and things like that. Or you are going to school, that those are the shorter trips that you can make. And similarly, if the second option is the bicycles. So bicycles, as I mentioned, either it can be in the form of bike sharing or scooter sharing, or it can be, for example, if you have your own bike and you are using transit, you can see that not only on buses, but also on LRTs and subways, they have, facilities where you can store your bikes and you can take it along. And then, so for example, you're coming from your home to the bus station or train station on a bike, and then you, hop onto the train or bus and take your bicycle with you. And when you get off to your destination, again, the bike is available so that you can go to your destination point, whether it is work or school or something. So that those are the options are available. And again, we mentioned about the autonomous shuttle services that are also coming along. And they are not only autonomous, but they are also electric vehicles. So, less harm to the environment and more good for, for our environment overall. So those are the things that are going on. Yes.
Recently, I sat in on a webinar that you delivered with what was it, Net Zero Atlantic, and it was about climate action, and it was about the barriers, to climate action, and I loved that segment where you focused on how there are a lot of people who there's a lot of blockages, and let's talk about that a little bit. Like there's blockages, and then you also have some ideas of how to change that.
Yeah, so talking about climate change has its own set of challenges. Climate change is not a singular event. It's many things. It's a slow-moving disaster, so to speak. And for a lot of people, that trade-off between short-term benefit and long-term can be really difficult. And climate change can be overwhelming. It can be very complex. It can be an overwhelming, even frightening problem. And some people that we may say are climate deniers, it's probably fear management. And I get that sometimes. Like it's just so big and complicated that you have to have a bit of cognitive dissonance to get through your days if you work in this sector. There's fear of loss of jobs, of lifestyle, and there's a lot of other day-to-day things that can make it challenging. I mean, if you're if you're living on lower incomes, those immediate threats are your reality. And I think it's particularly bad right now. There's a cost of living, cost of housing crisis. Maybe you're not in a location that easily has solutions. For example, there's no public transportation. You could be worried about costs. There could be immediate threats from inequality. If you're in a historically marginalized community, worrying about climate change may sometimes feel like a luxury because you're dealing with discrimination right in front of your face, complexity paralysis. There's all these things. Plus, there's not the greatest reporting on climate change sometimes, and there's skepticism, there's lack of trust, there's active campaigns of misinformation, which is sad. I don't spend a lot of time talking to climate deniers. I don't have that energy. I don't think they're a large group, but they are a vocal group. And I don't think as a society we're not that scientifically literate anymore. I think we could go a long way to learn about that. But I think it's a large, overwhelming problem. People don't think their contributions can make any difference. Maybe the drop in the ocean kind of argument. And I get that. That's a challenging one to deal with. And then fear of job losses is really an honest and very strong reaction. I mean, if you got mortgage, you got kids going through university, just the cost of living. I get that some people are worried about the cost of things, which is why, people have unfortunately successfully used things such as carbon pricing to just say it's a tax that's not needed. It's adding to the cost of living, even though the carbon tax is a minute part of inflation and in fact benefits more people the way it's set up now. So.
Why is it important to invest in climate initiatives now?
Well, we should have done it a long time ago, but better late than never. And it's really about we really have a narrowing window of time to drive down our emissions. Our ethically determined carbon budget for the city, we're set to blow it by 2027 or 2028 if we keep with the more business as usual approach to doing things. And if the whole world does that, every city, every province, every country keeps on going too slowly, we're going to see the repercussions of that warming for a really long time. If we were to stop emitting all greenhouse gas emissions today, we'd still have impacts for years and years to come, right? So we really need to be looking at solutions that shift our energy system entirely, reduce the energy demand of our buildings, change our transportation system, get more people in buses and on active transportation, as well as switching to EVs, all these kinds of things. It takes a massive effort to change something that's so entrenched in the way we've done things as a society for a really long time. Yeah.
You said you consulted with businesses and also with residents as well. So what can residents do? What can people do to advance this a little bit further?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's one that we hear a lot. There's a real feeling of overwhelm and a lack of power around individual work in climate change. So much of it is needed to be done by government, by utilities, by the engineers, by the scientists, right? So we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we have a page on our website about things to think about if you are wanting to take action. First of all, voting is really important. Voting for people who reflect your values and beliefs that are environment and climate related, as well as others. Also voting with your dollars. Consumer power is a very real thing. It speaks to a lot of people. And, you can make choices in your daily purchases and your larger purchases that have a really big environmental impact, both positive or negative. So everything from what car you might purchase next to the packaging of a bottle of medicine versus a different company's bottle of medicine, all of that, how you travel from A to B, all of those things have a lot of impact. And really we say that it's a lot of drops in the bucket still makes a really full bucket. So all the smaller choices, like using a reusable coffee mug, not buying bottled water when you don't need to, just reducing how much stuff you buy and where you buy it from. Is it coming from overseas? Because there's a lot of emissions related to transportation of goods, all of those things. It's those little things in your daily life, okay, what could I change that would make me feel like I'm doing something that's not too uncomfortable for me? What's a good step? And then once that feels good, maybe you want to take another step, things like that. The food you purchase, all, really climate is everywhere. It's really about like a healthy planet. And so there's a lot that can be done. Also volunteering or diving in on a project and just thinking about climate in your job, whatever your job may be, because there's climate considerations really across all jobs.
What would you say to someone who may be frustrated, with how slow the energy transition is moving? The world, we were talking earlier, you say the world is 5 years into a 50-year experiment.
Yeah, it's an experiment. We're talking about being net zero by 2050.
Right.
And I'm an old person, but I said I have to live till 2050 because I got to see whether we win or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an experiment. I think you have to say that people need to be generous, and we're trying to do things, and a lot of people are going to make mistakes with the best of intentions because the data we have is not perfect and the history is very limited. So allow them the right to have, in good faith, tried something, it didn't work, and go back and try something else, and don't jump on governments and don't jump on companies and complain and put them down because they didn't do exactly the right thing. We'll get there, and it needs everybody to be working positively and collaboratively to make it happen.
A minute ago, you mentioned about net zero, and there's the push to become net zero by 2050. So according to your numbers and what you know in the industry, are we on course to achieving this goal? And or what needs to happen to get to net zero? Right. Are there any areas that are lacking?
Yeah, that's probably the most important, well, I'd argue, kind of one of the most important questions we face, right?
Crystal ball. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, are we on track? Certainly not. But I remain an optimist. I think a friend uses the term a conditional optimist. I'm optimistic, conditional on a few things, but me and a whole bunch of other people smarter than me are working hard on this problem. And so I remain optimistic. But I just finished some work with a group in the States, kind of charting out a path to net zero energy system for 2050. And so kind of been deep in the weeds on that. So I'll kind of speak to the States picture, knowing that Canada's similar, although, we're different as well. But I think the kind of high level trends are fairly similar where, to get to net zero by 2050, our models can show us, different ways to get there, right? And so things are going to have to change quickly. But I'd say, there's a consensus between kind of different groups of modelers that how we probably should get there is that, in the next 10 years, we need to electrify many end uses, right? Transportation, heating of buildings, and so on. Simultaneously, we need to kind of replace, fossil fuel generators with clean ones: wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, geothermal. Okay, but not only that, since we're electrifying a lot of end uses, we not only need to kind of substitute our emitting power plants with clean ones, we also just need to grow the level of total kind of power production in on our grid. And so that means adding a lot more wind, solar, geothermal, maybe gas with carbon capture, whatever it is, and a lot more transmission. And so that over the next 15 years or so, up till say 2035, that should get us we should be able to decarbonize, say, about 90%, 95% of our power sector. And that's, in fact, kind of in Canada, the new clean electricity regulations, that's more or less what they're trying to do through more of a kind of command and control approach. Now, if we do that, there's still other parts of the economy that we can't really just electrify simply, right? So that kind of electrification game will get us maybe about 2/3 of the way to a net zero economy. There remains about 1/3 of emissions, and that's from things like kind of industrial processes that we can't really electrify. They need really, really high-grade heat, or they need fossil fuels as kind of a material input for chemicals and so on, or other things that really require the energy density that fossil fuels have, like aviation. It's going to be very tricky to, say, electrify, an Airbus, your plane over to Paris. And so that's another part of the economy where we're trying to figure out how do we make liquid or gaseous fuels that are net zero, right? So that's why I know you probably chatted with some folks in the hydrogen economy. This is a big, I don't want to call it a buzzword. It's a big thing in Atlantic Canada and globally right now. And that's because folks have rightly recognized there's sectors of the economy that we can't simply electrify. We're going to have to figure out alternative solutions, and that might be hydrogen or hydrogen adjacent fuels like ammonia or methanol, or some other things like synthetic natural gas and so on. But the story is, the future is going to continue to have liquid and gaseous fuels.
Yeah.
What those are is an open question. And there's some smart folks working on it. And then the very final part I would say is that there's still other areas of the economy, say agriculture, and still parts of industry and transport that we might never fully be able to decarbonize. And so we might, a lot of the models say we're going to require some what we call net negative technology. So these are things like direct air capture, or using biomass to produce hydrogen or electricity and things like this, that on the ledger, they actually kind of, in terms of their life cycle emissions, they remove more emissions or CO2 equivalents than they produce. And so we're going to need some of those net negative technologies unless we get some really more disruptive kind of other technologies that we can't really, fathom right now.
Interesting.
But yeah, I would say that's sort of the path. Getting there is going to be challenging, and we're going to have to build a lot, right? So I think kind of putting that into practice is going to be the big challenge over the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, I love that, because and what I was always taught in marketing was what's in it for me. So you want to think about what's in the minds and the hearts of your customers and trying to match that. And you're certainly going to win them over. But how do you apply this to, let's say, energy, the leaders in the industry?
Yeah. And, I like where you went there, because it's really important to be able to, I think, utilize this Simon Sinek approach, if you've ever heard of that, which is start with why. It's really understanding your core why. In his theory that he's proven out is that customers don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so while a lot of companies have focused on their corporate purpose, it's really important for leaders to be able to understand their why as well. And so I work with a lot of teams really identifying what is it that they're really trying to achieve and how do you bring people along. So leaders in the energy transition, really one of the first core things is focusing on why it is that they're here. And for me, it's really easy for me. You saw at the beginning of my speech in HalifACT, I started with my son, because at the end of the day, I think that I'm here to help that next generation, my son and his kids, have a healthy environment and a clean world that they can live in. So finding that why at the beginning and really being able to lean into that helps us when it comes to those really tough decisions and those trade-offs when it comes to energy transition and those complexities that we have to deal with.
I love it. What do you recommend to the energy leaders and how they can build trust and how they can hold each other accountable?
This is a good one. And this really starts to lean into not just the why, and the what, but how do we work together? And this is where there's been so much talk. You've heard this word over and over again in the electricity sector, is in order to get there, we need to collaborate. And often we find ourselves using that term, but really not using it correctly, almost misunderstanding the meaning of the word. And for us, this is about moving through a spectrum of this idea of turf versus trust, moving from things like our initial communication and coordination into true collaboration. Collaboration really happens when you can, number one, when somebody starts first, you have to offer that olive branch out there in order to build trust, whether it's between two individuals or it's between two companies or a group of people. And one of the ways that you can actually do that is, beyond the trust building exercises that exist out there, is by building something together, by starting with a blank page, looking at a complex challenge and, beginning some kind of, design sprint exercise that you can go through. But it can also be broken down into something really simple. An example of, using an exercise to build something that builds trust that we've used in workshops before is using Lego. Build something that actually resembles the electricity system and then talk about it. It's really interesting how people go back into what their real feelings are about the electricity system, what we're doing here, and how we show up for customers just by building an exercise like that. So I would say, building trust at the beginning is really important. And doing the work together. The other thing is that piece of holding each other accountable. As we move through this process of collaboration, ultimately we need to be able to divide and conquer those tasks. We can't do it all alone. And so we have to find the talents and strengths within the team and divide and conquer the work. And it's important, for me to know, if I'm working with you, Maria, what are you going to hold yourself accountable, and how can I check in with you? Because at the end of the day, we've got a lot of work that needs to happen, and we need to be able to move quickly. So while we're working together, that's one of the ways that we'll be able to do that, is by holding each other accountable and checking in.
Interesting. Well, we all know there's a climate problem here in North America, but where does Climative come in to kind of help the climate or address it?
Yeah, it all starts with the building owner. We have a lot of tools that help the building owner be more informed and make better decisions. And again, back to these conversations that we need to start. There's only been about 10% of the building stock assessed to date. So we're working on the 90%. How do we get that conversation started with as many building owners as we can? And so, that's what we do. We work with stakeholders in the ecosystems, like provinces, like states, local governments, utilities, efficiency organizations, and we help them amplify their message, amplify their programs, and make it much, much easier for homeowners to consume these programs.
Climate action is a collective effort, and it starts with each one of us. By listening to the voices and ideas of those who are actively working towards a greener future, we can gain valuable knowledge and inspiration to take action in our own lives. What are your thoughts on today's episode? Drop us a line at reimaginedenergy.com. I'm your host, Maria McGowan. Thanks for listening.